take it away.
Yes. Okay. So I'm hoping you can see a picture of the kind of playground I think we want to be moving away from. And I'm going to just spend 10 minutes. Really what I'm trying to do in this talk is there's a story about health and safety, which goes something like, it's health and safety gone mad. We can't do the things we used to be able to do. We have to protect children from all possible sources of harm. There's people suing each other left, right, and centre, and it's all grim. And parents are anxious and terrified. And what I'm here to do, I think, in a nutshell, is to bust that myth and actually to say there's been a slow burn revolution in completely the opposite direction, that we've seen a kind of thoughtful, balanced reappraisal of the role of risk and uncertainty in children's lives. And that's really good news. It's really good news for schools. It's good news for playground designers. It's good news for park managers. It's especially good news for children, for kids themselves who are actually finding that they've got a bit more choice in their lives. So if you type in risky play into Google now, it's really interesting to see what comes up. There's lots of images of children doing exciting, adventurous things, often in the woods. And that speaks to this sort of shift in awareness and this growth in understanding about play in children's lives. I'm going to say a bit more about why I think this has happened and the key practical development. And I'm going to just close with a few thoughts on parents, because I know they've come up. But first, I want to show you a map. And it's a map that I use a lot in my talks. And so what you're looking at with this map is what you might call the home territory or the roaming range of 4 8-year-old children. But they happen to be 4 children who were in 4 generations of the same family, who all grew up in the same city. Okay, so this big blob that you can see, the red dashed blob that takes up most of the map, that's the home territory of the great-grandfather in this family at the age of 8. He could go 6 miles, 10 kilometers across the city on his own. And then you can see how the circles shrink with each generation until here you can see the yellow dot up in the top left. That's the roaming range or the home territory of the son in this family. He's actually allowed to go to the end of his street. So what this encapsulates is what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And I'm sure if you think about your own childhood and childhood of the generation above you, and maybe if your own children or children, I'm sure you'll see the truth of this statement. And most of what I do and what gets me out of bed in the mornings is reflecting on and responding to this change in childhood, which I think is one of the most profound and underexplored in children's lives. And so when it comes to schools, I think the question this invites us to think about is what's happening here? What difference does this make to children's lives? And what does this maybe suggest that schools should be doing around playtime? Because when we think about childhood, amongst other things, childhood is a kind of journey. And when children are born, they're completely dependent upon adults for their most basic needs. But as they grow up, they gradually take more responsibility for themselves. They do more stuff. They take more decisions. So what you're seeing in childhood is what should be a gradual transfer of risk management responsibility from adults to children. And that's what these images try to capture. I think it was Kerry in Herne Hill who talked about life skills. And that's another way of seeing this. It's gradually learning life skills, but children learning from their own efforts and their own mistakes. And yes, children do sometimes make mistakes. But now we come to the knotty issue of the law. Now, I'm not a lawyer. In fact, I've got Kath and Michael to send a waiver declaring that fact. But I know a little bit about the law. And so, for instance, if you look at the very basic messages from health and safety law, from employers' liability, from occupiers' liability legislation, what's it about? It's about expecting you to do what is reasonable. Okay, that's a really important word. It's in the heart of the legislation. Take reasonable steps. And if anybody is asking you to go beyond what's reasonable, For instance, to keep children absolutely safe or to give a guarantee that no child will ever be harmed at any point, well, they are being unreasonable. Okay? So it's balance and proportion is at the heart of the legislation. We sometimes lose sight of that. So when we look at, again, in very simplest form, how health and safety programs and approaches work, they're really based on and they're grounded in what happened in factories and workplaces. And in a factory and a workplace, risk assessment is about figuring out what can hurt you or do harm and then controlling those sources of harm. So it's about risk reduction. But when we think about children and how children learn, and especially children's play, actually that model doesn't work anymore. And instead, we need to take a balanced approach. We need to weigh up the risks and the benefits, crucially, including the benefits of exposure to risk, the good things that happen precisely when we allow children to take some responsibility for themselves. And as Kath said, this notion of risk-benefit assessment, it's not just something that a few outdoor types have made up or play advocates like me. It's now becoming mainstream. So Kath's mentioned the Health and Safety Executive Statement on Children's Play and Leisure that talks about risk-benefit assessment as a sensible approach to risk management. If you're listening to this in Scotland, you'll maybe be aware of the Care Inspectorate report. So this is the regulatory body in Scotland that regulates out-of-school childcare and other social care services. And in its report, My World Outdoors from a few years ago, it talks about, and I really like the phrasing here, moving away from a traditional deficit model that takes a risk-averse approach to a more holistic risk-benefit model. And again, we heard earlier teachers talking about recognizing the competencies and the skills and the abilities that children already have. And here's a quote from Amanda Spielman. Now, I know Ofsted is not without cause a source of some concern and anxiety at the moment, but actually when it comes to this topic, Ofsted is also calling for a balanced and thoughtful approach and for resisting the pressure to become risk averse. So this has been, as I said, a slow burn revolution, but it's been happening and it's continuing to happen over recent years. So you can see a few milestones that mainly with the UK in mind. I'm not going to read them out, but the takeaway here is that I and my colleagues have been trying to build the case and push the case for a balanced approach to risk for quite a long time, and we've made quite a lot of progress. You'll see the HSE statement about 10 years ago, but just last month, possibly the high watermark in all of this, was a new international safety standard from the International Standards Organization, the ISO. So these are the global experts in safety management, in risk, around leisure and children's play and recreation and sport. And this new standard is actually got the phrase benefit risk assessment in the title. Okay, so now you might be thinking, well, what's this got to do with me and my school? Well, it's a document that you may or may not want to refer to, but what it speaks to is this wider shift, this move away from excessive risk aversion and towards a more balanced approach. And over time, we will see this statement on top of the Health and Safety Executive Statements and the other materials, and just the spreading of good news and good practice, creating possibility and opening up new ways of thinking about play and playtime. So just to say a tiny bit more about risk benefit assessment, here you can see a conventional risk assessment. There are lots of ways of doing a risk assessment, but this is one of them. The HSE used to talk about 5 steps to risk assessment. So what's different about risk benefit assessment? Well, in a nutshell, there's only 2 real differences, but the most important one is the very first step. You think about and you articulate the benefits of what you're doing. So the benefits, say, of the Opal approach to play. And you're clear in your own mind about what those benefits are and how you expect them to unfold. And then the second step is where you start thinking about your decision making, your evaluation. You think about the benefits alongside the risks and you bring them together in a holistic judgment. And that's really what it's all about. But I hope you can see it's a game-changing move. Now, I promised to say a little bit about parents. At the risk of running a tiny bit over time, Kath, I'm going to do that because I know it's already come up, that this knotty question of what do we do about the parents? Now, I think it's important to realize that parents, like the rest of us, are on a kind of continuum or a spectrum when it comes to their attitudes to child safety and to the risks to their children. So if you're thinking about parents and the parents that you know, well, you probably know some parents who might be in the market for this product. I don't know if you can see this on your screens. These are knee pads for toddlers. Okay, so they mitigate the risk of injury from crawling on hard flooring surfaces. Okay, so that's at one end of the continuum. Then at the other end of the continuum, you might have parents whose approach to risk and safety kind of is rather too laissez-faire. This is a news story. We see them from time to time about parents who left their children to fend them for themselves. Now, these are the two extremes, and we probably have something to say to the parents at both of those extremes. But most parents are somewhere in the middle. Okay, most parents, they know they have a responsibility and they know that adults around us, schools have a responsibility, but they also understand that part of childhood is about gradually untying the apron strings, learning how to learn those life skills and figure out how to deal with everyday stressful situations and challenges and stand up on your own 2 feet. And I think it's really important to hold on to that. And the final thing about parents is that I think one of the things that schools and settings really need to think about, alongside the communication and the inspirational positive materials, which we've heard about, celebrating what children are doing in playtime. One of the things to think about is how do you deal with the anxious and vocal parent? Okay, the parents who are at this end of the spectrum, they're in a minority. I think we need to be clear about that, but they can often, if we give the wrong signals in schools, we can somehow end up feeling like we've given those parents a veto. One parent comes up and complains about something happening in a playground, and then the school feels under pressure to stop that thing from happening or take out that piece of equipment. And that's not a proportionate and balanced approach. So let's think about how we can respond differently to those anxious and vocal parents. And finally, I'm going to share, it's a kind of internet meme that certainly cropped up on my social media, maybe on yours, and it's this sentiment. And I think it's an admirable sentiment when we think about children and children's learning. And I think any educator will get this. But I think it's also a message to us as adults, to people running schools, to recognize that actually the great things that happen when we transform playtimes are when we get a little bit out of our comfort zones. Because when we give children the chance to encounter uncertainty, we're also accepting a little bit of uncertainty and unpredictability in our own lives. But I hope you'll agree with me that it's worth it. Thank you very much.